over 1,800 companies worldwide. But it actually has roots in Asia. There's no sort of documented evidence, but the myth or the legend is that the emperor, I'll probably mispronounce this altogether, but the emperor who unified China with the Qin dynasty in 221 BC, the emperor Qin Shi Huang, I think, his non-emperor name was Ying Zhang. Forgive me, I butchered that. But in 221 BC, the emperor who unified China, founded the Qin dynasty, was known as a person who sought like many ancients did, many wise men, he sought the key to immortal life and consumed various substances. And it's rumored that one of them was a fermented tea. And that's what kombucha is. It's basically tea, which of course China and India are known for, and it can be black or green tea, and it's fermented. I can get into some of the production techniques. It's very easy to make at home, and you can also go into any store, certainly here in California, the local Safeway or Whole Foods will carry many brands of kombucha. It's usually kept in a cold cabinet, so if you look at the end, like I live in Vallejo in the North Bay, and if you go to the Safeway, look in there, you'll see a couple of hundred bottles of kombucha. 10 years ago, you wouldn't have found any. You would have had to go to some real hippie health food store to find it, but it's really exploded as a beverage. And California kind of led the way in commercial kombucha, but it does have deep Asian roots. And today, my estimates are about 20% of the companies around the world are based in Asia. There's not as many as you'll find in California or in the US, but they're coming up fast. I've interviewed on my blog, boochnews.com. I just did a podcast interview with a young woman who founded the kombucha company in Jaipur, which is the capital of Rajasthan in India. Interestingly enough, 68 million people live in Rajasthan. She's got the kombucha company. So strategy called the blue sky strategy in marketing. That's the ultimate blue sky. She's got no competition and a potential consumer base of 68 million. But anyway, that's sort of my background, as Hong said, is in tech. We met when we worked at Sun Microsystems in the Asia Pacific group. And I used to go off to Australia and meet with the salespeople. If they can't, you travel to Japan a lot. It's been a long road since then. But 15 years ago, I started brewing my own kombucha at home and became fascinated. I'm now retired, so one thing that keeps me busy is a blog called boochnews.com, and I also publish a magazine. It's called Symbiosis, and you find references throughout the blog. It's published by the Kombucha Brewers Trade Association.
Great. Thanks, Ian, for sharing your passion here. So kombucha is a health drink and all that. Back then, when you started out, what options did kombucha drinkers have at that time? So I think you were in the early days. The US certainly is the biggest market at this point. But in the early days back then, I think even in the US, it was difficult to find kombucha if you wanted to drink it.
Yeah, it was. I mean, you call it a health drink. It's not, it's not something like medicine. It's an alternative to basically sodas. And in my case, I gave up alcohol 15 years ago. I have to tell everybody I'm not an alcoholic. I don't know exactly to the minute how long it is since I had my last drink. And I know many people in AA count the days, but I just gave it up. I got to an age where I thought, I don't want to drink anymore. And I got sick of drinking Calistoga water and orange juice and fruit juices. And I found kombucha in Whole Foods. So 15 years ago, you could find it in the health food stores. You can mark the date when it became commercially, there's a whole history to it, as I said, back to China in 221 BC. But it was very popular in Europe, in Eastern Europe, Russia, Germany, those countries, Poland. From the beginning of the 20th century, kind of after World War I, most Russian grandmothers, like in Korea, every grandmother has a recipe for kimchi. In Russia, every grandmother had a recipe for kombucha. But it's fermented, and the longer you let it ferment, the more vinegary it gets. So these grandmothers would just let it sit on the on the mantelpiece on the kitchen counter, and they would give their children, if they had an upset stomach, a spoonful of kombucha, and it didn't taste that good because it was very vinegary. Well, 1995, a young man, he was a teenager at the time, GT Dave, he goes by the initials GT, and he started fermenting kombucha, and his parents, he was still in high school, I think, or just at college, and took it to the local health food store and started selling less fermented. It wasn't vinegary, it was more of a, you start with very sweet tea, so if you only ferment it for a week or so, 2 weeks, it's still got a sweet taste, although the sugar isn't predominant. There's not as much sugar as you would get in a Coca-Cola or any soda. And GT Dave is the guy I mentioned who's a billionaire. So if you go on YouTube, you can Google GT Dave Forbes, and you'll see a profile of him that Forbes magazine did, because he started the commercial business and capitalized on it, did a very good, he's a very savvy business person. And if you go to a Safeway, most of the shelves carry GTs called Synergy Kombucha. And 15 years ago, you could find it in the health food stores in Marin, in the Bay Area, but you couldn't have found any, say, in Ohio or in New York. You probably couldn't have found kombucha anywhere. It's gone gangbusters since then. It's really taken off as what the buyers in the grocery business say, or in the produce business say, it's on trend. So certain things have become very trendy, like oat milk has suddenly exploded. Kombucha exploded about 10 years ago in this country. So we went from maybe 10 or 15 or 20 companies literally to now, I think, has over 600 in the US. And there's 2 or 3 big ones, GTs, Health Aid, there's 3 or 4 brands you'll find everywhere, but it's very local. So, in the North Bay, assuming many people live in the Bay Area, in Marin, there's a brand called Marin Kombucha in Petaluma, and it's locally available. It might be distributed maybe to Oregon, and there's another brand out of Moss Beach. If you know Moss Beach, south of San Francisco, there's a guy there. I visited him. He makes it, in like a garage-sized place. It's licensed. It's got health department clearance. You have to have that. Most companies start out by selling in farmers markets, and they maybe have a small following. And it's the kind of drink that if you haven't tried it, I would say go to a Safeway, pick up a bottle of GTs. There's many flavors. Favorite one of many people's is the Gingerade, if you like ginger, or if you like mango, you can buy a mango one, or you can buy the plain, called the OG, or the original gangster type, which is unflavored. And just give it a try. You might not like it at first. It's got a slightly tart flavor, like a mild apple cider vinegar, but it's filled with probiotics. So it's excellent for your digestion and overall health, B vitamins. It's got those kind of benefits. And it's refreshing. I drink usually a couple of bottles a day at lunch and dinner. And it's if you're hooked on 7-Up or Coke, it might give you less sugar in your system. It might have 6 grams of sugar in a serving, 16 ounces versus 54 or something in some crazy sodas that you find out filled with sugar.
Yeah, so things have clearly changed quite a bit since then. For example, so I think you covered the story about how kombucha is now served in, high-end gourmet restaurants in London, the top-end restaurants that are Michelin stars, right? Right next to wines, I guess, or something. Can you share that story a bit?
Yeah. Well, kombucha as a beverage, it's once you get into it, like I'm really into it because I've been blogging about it for 3 years. I've written over 200 articles about the business of kombucha, and there's parallels. You mentioned wine, so I'm showing my age now, but I first came to the US to graduate school in the mid-70s. And in those days, I did drink, and there was basically jug wine, right? There was Gallo, there was box wine, and then there was a few, I don't know what they were, Christian Brothers or BV up the Napa Valley. You could sort of spend $20 on a bottle of wine. Well, obviously, if any of you have been in the Napa Valley or Sonoma, or look at the wine in your local store, it's exploded. It's become, there are wine connoisseurs now who won't drink anything less than costs $100 a bottle. And it's the same obviously not to that price. In the world of kombucha, there are sort of more, I would say, mass market kombuchas. There's a whole divide between the natural, what they call the naturally fermented kombucha. It's got slight alcohol. It's got 0.5%, but some companies pasteurize it, some filter it, some take out all the alcohol because then it's what's called shelf stable. Otherwise, it has to be distributed in a refrigerated van and kept in a cooler, which is what you want to look for if you've never tried it. And there are companies that go an extra mile. It's made from tea. Now, you can use cheap black tea bags, Taifu or Lipton's, and it make kombucha. But it's like if you use cheap grapes to make wine, you're not going to have the elite experience that really good wine grape harvests will give you, that they cultivate in the Napa Valley. And some companies, the one you mentioned in London is called Real. It's outside of London. It's called Real Kombucha. If you look on their website, they produce that flavor. They don't add fruit juice to it. They use different types of tea. They have a very light green tea based one. They have a slightly heavier Ceylon tea based one. And these have distinct, it's like the difference between a Chardonnay and a Zin. And they pair them with foods. And they've got gourmet restaurants serving bottles or serving it on tap as an accompaniment to fine dining. Because if you don't drink alcohol and you go out to spend $100 on a nice meal at Chez Panisse or the French Laundry or somewhere, what are you going to drink with it? You're not going to want a 7-Up necessarily, and kombucha will give you that nuance of flavor. Once you get used to tasting it, it really can distinguish itself from the more everyday kombucha that you might take, if you just want something to quench your thirst. So there is those variations within the market of the premium kombuchas, if you want to call them that, and the more everyday ones. As I say, some are pasteurized, some are. Just don't drink the first kombucha and think I don't like it. Try a couple of flavors if you're not, a couple of brands maybe, if you've never tasted it before.
Wow, there's a whole new world opening up as we speak. With that, I do want to welcome Hannah to our room. Thanks for visiting us. And I think Hannah was invited by Ian. So Ian probably knows something about Hannah's business.
I know a little bit about Hannah.
Yes, so please welcome Hannah.
Yeah, I'd like to introduce Hannah.
Yeah.
I'm delighted to see Hannah. Hannah is quite unashamedly known as Kombucha Mama. If you're not familiar with kombucha, if you want to learn all about it, then you need to go to the library or buy. It's listed on my resources page on my blog, the big book of kombucha. And guess who it's by? It's by Hannah. Hannah's also the president of the trade association, Kombucha Brewers International. She also has a thriving business called Kombucha Camp, where you buy the supplies to make your own kombucha. So hi, Hannah. Sheila, hi.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Welcome. Yes, Pong's Vietnamese, but Hannah, you do speak Mandarin, I believe, right?
Mandarin, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay. So Hannah, I want to, since you know all about kombucha yourself, I would like to invite you to introduce yourself a little bit and your publication, your book. Just a plug so we get to know you a little bit on the room, and then we will certainly open up for everybody to ask, to join in. I do want to highlight you as well. So please share with us about you and your journey and your book. That's probably going to the current Bible of kombucha.
Oh, well, thank you, and I appreciate the compliment. And Ian did an excellent job giving the overview. I'm known as the Kombucha Mama. I've been brewing and teaching kombucha since 2004, and we turned that into an e-commerce website. I started blogging in 07, and then people kept asking, hey, do you have a SCOBY? Where can I get one of these? I never intended to be a bacteria farmer, so I'm happily one. And not only do we supply kits and cultures for home brewers, but we also work with commercial brands around the globe, supplying them with cultures and things like that so they can expand their business, and also consultant to those brands. And as Ian met, my husband and I co-founded Kombucha Kombucha Brewers International in 2014 response to the withdrawal of kombucha from store shelves that occurred in 2010 due to the alcohol content. So alcohol has been a running conversation in our industry since.
Hello. Hi, Hannah. We lost you for a bit.
Oh, sorry about that. So the alcohol, hold on 1 second, let me tweak a setting here. Hopefully that will help. What I was saying is we founded Kombucha Brewers International in 2014 in response to the withdrawal of kombucha from all of Whole Foods shelves in 2010, which is quite a crisis. The moment it happened, of course, because it meant all of this delicious kombucha had to be purchased back by the producers and destroyed, essentially, because there was no outlet to sell it. And so this conversation around the alcohol, the trace amounts that are present in kombucha versus what the current laws are in various parts of the world has been an ongoing one. And in fact, even throughout our lobbying effort, which we're executing right now called Protect Raw Kombucha, we're trying to change those laws here in the United States so that kombucha is not taxed like beer and instead stays in the grocery aisle rather than the liquor store. Now that said, I have seen the rise of the industry. In 2007, when I started my blog, I collected every kombucha brand I could find. I was such a kombucha nerd. I just really was so excited about the product and the process, and I wanted to know everybody who was out there making it. And that love of the commercial aspect of it, because that's how I first was introduced to kombucha, by drinking commercially produced kombucha, and crossing over to help the home brewers. It's just been a dual passion of mine. And I could not have predicted I would end up here, but I'm so grateful for this journey because it's really, we're a unique industry in that we're very young. We mirror other craft beverage industries. A lot of people liken us to the craft beer industry about 30 years ago. But of course, our challenges are unique. And as Ian alluded to, as this counterculture, meaning something we grow on our counters and being unusual, as we grow up and mature as an industry, you're going to have people who want to take shortcuts or do it an easy way or do it, use solutions that have worked for other industries. And that's great because I think it's going to give us an opportunity to capture a much larger market share. The way I think of it is kind of like raw juice, right? Like you can't get raw juice everywhere because of the short shelf life, potential spoilage, and so sometimes you have to buy pasteurized juice, or sometimes you buy juice from concentrate. And so I really think that as much as I love traditional kombucha, it's not necessarily a flavor or the product that's for everybody. And so by embracing the diversity of different techniques that are being used, while at the same time protecting that authenticity by asking for transparency, by asking brands to clearly list on their label the processes they're exerting to their products so that there isn't consumer confusion. I could go on and on and on, but I certainly don't want to hog the stage, so please, leave it up for questions.
Thanks for sharing. Clearly, you also, we now have two very, very knowledgeable people here in the room. So I have one last question, either to Ian or Hannah. It's up to you. And then I do want to rush out and open up the room for everybody to join in. We talk. It sounds like we only talk about the U.S., but it's not just the U.S., right? It's now a global market of kombucha. So can you share a perspective as to which countries would have the most brands of kombucha, or which countries drink the most kombucha at this point? Because this is really an evolving dynamic situation at this point.
Right. I certainly would. I mean, Hannah might have. Her trade association is an international one, so Kombucha Brewers International, so she can certainly chime in. But I will say on my blog, one thing that people might like to look for is on the top of the page. There's a link to a worldwide directory, and I just do that myself sitting at home. I basically go to Instagram because my studies show over 90%, 99% of all brands, it's a young industry, it appeals to young people. So Instagram is kind of where it's at. Most of them have an Instagram account. And then I see who follows them, and I follow the trail, and I keep track of the companies. And whereas the US, California probably leads in the number of brewers, the country with the most per capita, because I just did a simple thing, I divided the number of brands by the population. New Zealand has the most per capita. It's a small country, relatively speaking. And then, I from the UK, as people might be able to tell, and the reason I started the blog is 3 years ago, I was back in the UK, and I'd been drinking kombucha for 10 more years. I couldn't find it in too many places, so I started looking around, and I saw, there's only it seemed to me it was like 10 years behind, certainly California, but it's caught up like crazy, and the worldwide directory now has over 70 brands in the in the UK. And in Asia, as I said, there's brands in pretty much most regions. Singapore, there's a number in Japan, China, India, Malaysia. In fact, there was a blogger I put a guest posting who addressed the issue of, is kombucha halal, or is it haram? Is it forbidden or permitted by Islam? And he was able to prove it because it's 0.5% alcohol, it's not intoxicating, it is halal, it's permitted. So around the world, it's got the other country that leads, maybe Hannah would be able to come to this, is Brazil. Brazil has hundreds of brewers, many of them very small, and that's the other thing. Most countries only have one or two national brands. So we've got GTs and Health Aid and Herman. The UK has Equinox, and you can find these brands kind of across the country. But it's a very small regional, and I will mention maybe, I don't know, this is kind of a business network. It's a great business. Maybe Hannah can come in because she consults with people, but most people start by brewing at home, and then it's kind of the way people sell cupcakes. They make great cupcakes, they go to a farmer's market, they sell more, and maybe eventually they own a cupcake company. Many brewers of all stripes, they might get big investments sooner or later, but it's the kind of business you can launch from your home and grow. Anna, you probably have comments about the international.
Yeah, definitely. We're seeing it pick up steam all across the globe, including places like Africa and all the countries in Asia. I know Vietnam also has, I haven't visited there in my life, unfortunately, not yet, but I know that like healthy eating and vegan and sort of kombucha dovetails in with that type of lifestyle. So some of the folks I've seen in Vietnam are capitalizing on that trend or a fresh juice and parlaying that into their kombucha business, which is also very healthy. So the use top line for a lot of people, obviously during the pandemic, and so kombucha continues to have a really great opportunity to meet people where they are and to provide something that is certainly not a cure, but can be a great tool in the toolbox to help boost immunity and keep the engine running smoothly, give them a little energy boost and things like that. But Ian has sort of taken the torch of my running tally of all the companies and expanded it greatly. And I really love working with Ian to collaborate together on Symbiosis Magazine, which was he came to me with this idea and I said, let's do it. So I'm really grateful to continue to work with him in the kombucha sphere and help just get a lot of education and information out to everybody in a commercial brew.
Thanks again. Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Hannah. At this point, I would like to refresh the room and open it up so that we have folks calling in from all over the world. So, the survey will have that question, either as a drink for themselves, or a hobby, all the way to an entrepreneurial opportunity that they may want to pursue. So, before we open up the room, I would like to Cindy to refresh the room, at least at the room before we open it up.
Thank you very much. Hello everyone, welcome to the Asian Americans Network. Today's event is total for 1 hour. We will open Q&A after the guest sharing. Please feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions for our guest, or if you want to echo and make a comment, we will invite you to the stage. I would like to say thank you to Ian and Hannah as our guests today. So please follow us by clicking the green house beside the club name. You will get the event detailed information after we post it each time. So this event is presented by Silicon Valley Innovation Channel, DTTV. In the past 12 years, we have been focusing on brand building, innovation, and connecting entrepreneurs and VCs. So we host more than 80 events every year. We also have a 4,000 square feet professional studio for rent in Santa Clara. It can be the video program or film production venue, and it's good for small events as well. So please contact us if you are interested. This is Sandy. I'm done speaking over to Tom. Thank you.
Thanks, Cindy. Thank you very much. So now I'd like to open up the room, and I'm going to follow the mic sequence and allow everybody to join in. You don't have to, of course, but yes, join in. You can share your experience with kombucha, whether you love it or hate it, or actually also ask any question to Ian or Hannah.